Okay, I'm here again with Thupa, and we are going to talk about Kino's Journey, the beloved cult classic from the early 2000s, I think 2004. Thupa, how are you doing today?
You don't need to sniff my asshole. It's classic, but it's beloved in so little a matter that it really does not matter. I love it. You probably like it. About 3 other people watched it. That's it.
You're not the only person I've heard recommend Kino's Journey. It does seem to have a fan base out there, it just never achieved mainstream hit status.
There's no way. It's just like the only place I can see this piece of art advertised, this anime, like ever even being talked of, is probably slash A.
Well, I'm not an A guy, but you're the next best thing, so I guess that makes sense.
I actually never really set on A at all. Like I was a lot on pole and on B, but for different reasons.
Actually, a few days ago, I went on to slash A for maybe the first time, or it's the first time I actually made an effort to look around. 4chan's format scared me away when I was a teenager, so I never really went there. But I'm getting bored with the internet again as an adult, so maybe in my late 20s I will now finally get into 4chan, as God intended.
So what do you find there?
Nothing good.
Nothing, nothing good?
Yes.
Well, you sent me Technolize post. That was something.
I found a few things good, but nothing I can talk about here. So
That's usual with 4chan.
So I suspect most of the people listening have seen Kino's Journey. I would suggest doing that. We are going to talk about it. But a quick primer for those who do not. There is a young girl named Kino. You don't know immediately that she is a girl because she has a very androgynous appearance and has a very low-key personality. She is on a motorcycle named Hermes that talks, and she travels around the world having adventures and going to different countries where she only stays for 3 days. And the thing about countries in this world is a city and the area around it, it seems, is called a country. They are all very small, and the landscape is peppered with them. It seems like you can drive for a few hours from one country, find another, and the culture, the customs, the norms, the political structure, every country is radically different from every other country, and they are barely aware of each other's existence. They don't really interact at all. So the gimmick is seeing Kino constantly experience new cultures, acclimate, and then have to leave before she can really settle in. Thupa?
In a way, I would say, yeah, that's kind of right, but I do think that the countries are quite a bit far away from each other. That's usually why they don't interact with each other as much, because we see Kino travel quite a bit in this Kino's Journey animated series. Like, there's a whole episode, at least, for example. I believe it was the third one? Was it? No, it was the second one. A Tale of Feeding of Others. Where she just travels through the winter, finds a caravan stack in the snow, and decides to help the people out. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, yes.
I believe it's actually the one episode that I showed you just to entice you into this show in general, because here's another thing about Kino's Journey, as an animated series. It is structured through episodes where each one is a self-contained story on its own. Sort of imagine, what's it called? Fucking Space Cowboy, that's it. No, that's not the... What was the full name of Space Cowboy? Dandy? No?
Cowboy Bebop?
The classical. Yeah, that's the one.
Oh.
See you later, Space Cowboy. That's the last thing in the show. Was it?
I think so.
I'm horrible with names. I'm atrocious with names. I genuinely don't remember. Even the fact that I've watched it a couple of times does not mean that I will remember the name of the fucking anime. And it's a good one too. It's like a classic. by every standard. Anyway, Kino no Tabi has episodic structure where every episode is a self-contained story, unlike which has its advantages in that you can pop it on, enjoy a couple of episodes, have a complete experience, or just do one. That's good as well, and then move on with your day. And it's not really a show that you would usually binge, but I think you can get a lot out of it if you do watch a lot of them in a row, or with short breaks in between. How do you like your watch of it recently?
It was fun. We did watch that first episode a while ago, which was good. I do think Kino is a pretty bingeable series, partially because there's only one place where they do a 2-episode arc, and there are several episodes where they are split in 15 minutes, if not smaller, and there are smaller sub-arcs within a single episode. So Kino progresses pretty quickly. It never gets too bogged down in what it's doing. Even though
But to that, I do have to say that you see, like, the episodes are actually quite heavy sometimes. Like, they may be short, but there's a lot there to think about and rewatch, if you will.
With Kino, the pacing of the individual episodes can be very slow, but they are pretty dense in delivering what they actually try to give to the viewer. Where scenes might go for a long time, but episodes never really do. They reach their point pretty quickly. Talking about Kino as a character, her personality is really hard to pin down for me. Kino is very placid, she's very calm. She seems really passionate about what she does, but not in a way where it ever shows that much emotion. She really cares about traveling, she's really into her lifestyle, and at times she gets really into what she's doing or trying to accomplish in the moment. But it's always behind this wall of you can never really understand what Kino's thinking or feeling entirely. And I find her really complex in that way.
Kino is definitely the monolith in the show because she's unchanging. She's been, it's actually one of the episodes that is extra, that is released on top of the series as an individual OVA, basically. Short story about her training with Master, and that more about that woman in general. But Kino on her own is fucking unflappable. She always keeps her cool, and she keeps to certain parameters that just ensure her own safety a lot of the time, which is, I think, in part why she appears so reserved, despite the fact that she has a lot of emotions. do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, that makes sense. Where when you think about it, it is fair to attribute a lot of Kino's personality and the way she acts with other people to her lifestyle, because we do briefly see her as a young girl, and she seems a lot more outgoing in that situation. But by the time we're with main series Kino, she has spent 3 years living a very rough, individualistic, isolated lifestyle. And the only real positive role model she had in her life is she very briefly had Kino the Elder, you could call him, original Kino. And then she had Master, who was a total hard-ass, so it's not that crazy that she ended up the way she did. And
this is, I believe, The Land of Adults, 4th episode of the show. Let's talk about that for the moment, I say. So the way it starts is we are introduced with a traveler called Kino, a man journeying into the town and wanting to experience its culture. What happens after is he runs into a girl, she's being bullied by the people, her name is associated with a flower, but we never hear it, nor do we hear the flower's name. And she doesn't like it much because it's very easy to do some kind of wordplay and make it an insult. A childish one, but we're talking about a child at this point, maybe like of 12 years old, if I recall.
Well, the plot point is that Kino is going to turn 12, And that's why she has to leave.
Yes.
Because on your 12th birthday, they cut out your brain.
Well, kinda. So as we go along with this particular episode, she introduces her parents who are hosting in an inn. It's their inn, and Kino, the traveler, the man, settles in there. She shows him around city. They repair a motorcycle together, and they have a lot of conversations, bonding and just trying to understand each other better. And as we do, we get these small nuggets from the girl who says, "What are adults in your opinion? How do you become an adult? Are you a child or not? What is your job?" And these sort of things. And it starts a little innocent. It's just her wondering about something different. And then we get these things where, well, when you reach the age 12 in this country, you become an adult. And as an adult, you have to do jobs that you may not like at all. Fucking hate them. But you still have to do them, and to make that possible in this country, you undergo some kind of operation where they literally say they cut out a child out of you. Quote. Unquote. And suddenly we get this new perspective on the episode that's all been happening in the background, where the first time we see Kino's parents, they look fucking miserable for a moment. Like, they're leaning, well, mother's like leaning on the broom, father's like all slumped against the desk, and the moment the traveler comes in, they just spring up and they have these giant welcoming smiles on their faces, and they're all happy and cheerful and glad and adult-like. I'm doing air quotes right now, you can't see it anyway. And we'll get this scene, and like every adult we see henceforth has this giant smile. Even the fucking teacher in the flashback we get in the middle of the show of girl's teacher who says, "I don't like this job, I hate it, but I have this huge smile because I got an operation." Or essentially he says that. And the traveler doesn't agree with it. He has his objections, but as a traveler, his policy is that he always stays in the city 3 days, he does not interfere, and that he just moves on. So we come to the closing minutes of the episode where, after having all of these interactions, it's the last day, the traveler is going to leave today, and Kino, the girl, confronts her parents about the operation. She says, "I don't want to do it. Is there another way for me to become an adult?" They freak the fuck out. They try to murder her. The traveler gets in the way, and while they're comically pulling out a knife out of him, as the crowd behind is cheering their parents because they want to dispose of their defective child. She gets a moment to talk with Hermes, who offers her another option on her life, because she essentially is like, well, what are my options? 1, I can die here. 2, I can become one of these fucking insane kooks. And he's like, there's a third option. Fucking hop on, we're getting out of here. And that's how Kino's journey begins, with her inheriting the name Kino from a traveler that died saving her from her nightmarish country. And I think there's a lot to be said that she inherits a lot of the things that she does further on in the series from this particular point. Because the traveler that we come to familiarize ourselves with in this particular episode stayed in the country for 3 days. We never got the reason why he does that. And Kino, the girl from here on, from here on forward. Never always stays in the country for 3 days, but never has an explicit reason why she does that. Her own opinion is, or her own justification, I should say, for doing so is that she is afraid that she will get used to a country and won't want to leave and will cease to become a traveler in so doing, and she wants to continue her journey. However, it feels a little flimsy to me. I think that she literally just took it on as a part of what the traveler from who became this parental figure for her. She just inherited these sort of roles. I won't interfere unless I need to help somebody. Even then, I will try to keep my interference to the minimum. And lastly, I always stay in a place for 3 days and then I leave. Rain?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you doing?
Well, I'm thinking of what to say.
Sure. Well, this is the 4th episode of the show. There are a couple before that. And I believe, like, if we're talking about Kino in general, what we can say is that she stays very concrete through a lot of episodes. One of the ones that I think, like, really shakes her is the last one in this particular show, but chronologically, I would say it's probably somewhere in the beginning. This is one thing I would also like to underline about the show in general, is that there is a source material for this. But by author's own admission, by director's own admission, it has been changed for the original animated series quite a bit. For example, the Coliseum arc is actually longer in the anime than it was in the original source material. And a lot of things are shifted around. Some scenes are straight up added to the episodes. But here's the thing. I would say that the show was adapted quite well for what it's done. Because for all the additions of scenes, for all the additional content that there is, nothing seems like it's out of place, nothing seems extraneous. It feels like everything sticks together quite well. The order in which the series is portrayed, despite the fact that chronologically the episode that comes last is probably should be somewhere in the beginning, is actually probably one of the better places to end the show, portrayed in this episodic manner.
Yeah, that did work, and just assume there's going to be full spoilers. It really doesn't matter with this one, but fair warning. The final episode of the show, that is the point where it really comes crashing down on Kino, that her attitude of non-interference or selective interference finally reaches a point where she gives a strong emotional reaction and seems really dissatisfied with the result. In the final episode, as she's leaving the town, the locals seem really eager to shuttle her out of the doors, and they very specifically tell her, when you leave, make sure you get at least this distance from the town before you stop, because there's really hazardous terrain between here and the next country. And when she goes up and camps, she sees a volcano explode and destroy the city that she was just in and had just made a bunch of friends in. And
everyone dies horrifically. Everyone dies horrifically.
Yes, and then she reads a little note that they put in her to-go bag saying, "We knew that a volcano was going to blow up, but we are set in our ways and we are not willing to leave our home, and therefore we are going to simply accept our fate." And they make sure that Kino does not die, but Kino falls on her knees. She gets very upset. She had just made friends with a girl who had expressed interest in leaving and seeing the world, but ultimately decided to stay. And that's a very odd thing with Kino, where Kino watches people die fairly often. And when Kino will and will not intervene in a situation, Generally, she tries to keep her hands off. Generally, she tries to take a step back from situations, but sometimes she will try to change things. And figuring out the pattern of when Kino feels it's her business to get involved is one of the most difficult aspects of the character to me.
Here's another thing I would like to note about this particular episode, since we're talking about the last one. It is actually extremely close and similar to the episode about Kino's origin. The girl she comes in contact with
yes.
is someone whose parents own an inn. She has her name after a flower. Other children tease her about it. But it's kind of a reverse situation at the same time, because while it's extremely close to the Land of the Adults episode, it is very happy. People get married, nobody gets lobotomized in this episode, everything is surreal, everybody is extremely accepting of Kino and hands off with her. They have great time, but I think the most beautiful scene of this particular episode is that the child knows. Like, the adults, they think they've kept this information that there's gonna be lava and death and destruction in like a couple of days, if not hours, from children, but children are like, we know. They know. And there is a moment in this episode where there have been like solid 15 to 18 minutes of bonding between Kino and this little girl, and adults come out and say, hey, daughter, let's call her Sakura for convenience. Sakura, do you want to become a traveler? Do you want to go with Kino as your mentor and like travel the world? You want to become a better tour guide, so seeing other countries will help you be a better tour guide. And she like takes a minute and she looks at her parents, she looks at Kino, she contemplates for a moment, and she looks back and says, no, I would like to stay. I would... And they have like this very heartwarming moment. And then in the last moments of the episode where Kino unpacks the note from this child and she says, these seeds from the wedding that you picked for me, I don't need them. There is no point in me having them anyway. And you realize that she knew she was going to die if she stayed, and she deliberately chose that for herself because she loved her parents this much. It was fucking heartbreaking. And it colors the episode in a completely different melancholic feel when you watch it again or think back on it. It's quite a feeling. Quite an experience. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this particular like moment is really touching, but the experience that Kino has with it by falling on her knees and reading this letter and then basically sounding out the letter, the second note that the Sakura girl left with her about how the seeds were, it is fascinating. It is definitely something where Kino gets tested on her ability to, no, not so much an ability, her policy of non-interference, because it is something that she probably inherited from the traveler, her parental figure, quote unquote. And in this particular case, she now knows that if she had been more concrete and if she had stood and maybe tried to find out why people were so adamant that she'll leave this moment, this day, and does not stay at all, despite the fact that she explicitly wanted to break the rule and stay longer in this city.
Yes, this was the only point in the entire series where Kino is on the third day and actively tries to stay. And it ends up being the locals who push her out, entirely by coincidence. They bring up her 3-day rule as an excuse to chase her off, but they don't really care. They are secretly thinking about the volcano. It's just convenient they can use that against her.
Well, I would say that they don't care, because they want their city to be known off as a place that was kind to travelers, because as they originated their new country after they've been pushed out, they were known as bad people for a long time, and because they were very crass with travelers. And ironically, when you're crass with travelers, less of them come, so when you change your policy about travelers, there are not so many around to spread the good word. So yeah, I would say they wanted her out. But the fact of the matter is that Kino, if she was more determined in finding out the reason why they wanted her out of the city, she could have resulted into something. She could have probably saved the girl. She could have interfered and done something good. But she didn't. And it's something that she has now to live on forthwith.
And you mentioned they're out of order, so that episode with the volcano probably was one of the earlier parts of what we see of her journey. I think I've noticed a bit of a pattern with Kino, where the best I can come up with is that it seems like if the environment is hurting you, Kino is more willing to intervene. You mentioned that episode we watched first, where she finds a broken down truck with starving people, and Kino runs out to hunt rabbits for them to keep them alive. But if human choices are hurting someone, or especially someone's choices are hurting themselves, Kino doesn't seem to care at all.
Yeah, it's something I would reinforce. It was in one of the later episodes. It was one with a couple of ones in there, like 3 short stories. There was one about the wise men, and there were 2 about gunsmen there. It starts with the one where it's in a bar, it's kind of dim, it's kind of moody, and there's a dude that she's talking to, and he says, well, in this land, I was a criminal. There was a dragon in my heart, and I killed this girl's fiancé because I was a complete dickbag. But she gave me a second chance. She said, if you are a better person, we can go on a journey together. And I will protect her. I've become a better person, and I will now do my best to compensate her for what she has lost because of me, in a way at least. And she has genuinely become, like a lot of people reference that he has become a better person. But the last thing he asks, as a senior traveler in this circumstances, what does he have to look out for as he's leaving and this girl is standing at the doorway looking hella suspicious? Like, she's not pleased with his company at all. He asks Kino, so what do I do as a traveler? And she's like, first things first, look out for your life, don't die. And he dies immediately after. Next scene is him getting shot by the woman he was trying to protect, because she just couldn't leave it down. And Kino's just right there. She's helping anyone. She gave the advice. I think she hinted him to the fact that this is the person that is very likely to kill him. And afterwards, the woman kills the fucking dude with a dragon in his heart. It's like, sits in a wagon and says, well, that's done and over with. What should I do with my life now? I guess I'll go on a journey, as I've intended. So, Kino, as a senior traveler, do you have any advice for me? And she just gives the same one. Look out for yourself. Don't die. It is to reinforce your point that when the conflict is more so not between the environment, but between the people, she's much more reluctant to help, I would say.
And part of where that might come from is when Kino was a little girl and she first got the motorcycle and she escaped from her family that was going to kill her, she ends up stranded in the woods and wolves are going to eat her. Master shows up, the woman who is eventually going to raise Kino and train her to be train her to be a traveler, and shoots the wolves, grabs Kino, and then goes off. But we learn later that when Master raised her, Master explicitly told her to hide her connection to Master, to not form attachments to other people. It could just be Master's influence, that Kino's idea of an appropriate traveler is someone who will fight off hostile wildlife and protect people from nature, but who has no human social instincts. And that moment where she met Master and Master shot the wolves, maybe that just imprinted on Kino as a formative moment in her life.
That's a fair point, yeah.
About the conflict thing, there are multiple parts in here where Kino sees what is basically a genocide either happening or about to happen and doesn't even consider intervening.
Oh my god, this show gets quite heavy at points. Sometimes because of all the philosophical undermeaning, and sometimes because it's just a really shitty situation. I believe it's the Peaceful Land episode, the 12th one, where it's basically an episode about two countries which were at war for over 100 years, like fucking almost 200 years. I think it was like 160 or something. Anyway, they were at war for a while, and lots of people die. They sometimes have like stalemate and they go back to rebuild, but inevitably they go back to warring. And these two women have an idea as their children die on both sides of the conflict that we cannot continue like this. And they make a proposal to their government that there's a tribe of primitive people living right next to both of our countries. What we will do is we will occasionally gather and have a quote-unquote war against these people at the bottom of the food chain. They cannot fight back, they cannot do anything, but we will turn our war between each other, which has destroyed so many lives, into a competition. A blood sport for all means and purposes. And they settle for that. And the worst part about this entire situation that we have an interaction with this woman as Kino learns about the history and witnesses this war that they have with a tribe that can't even fight back. But the situation is extremely shitty. But there is no better solution necessarily, because if somebody just proposed to stop the war, they'd be shut down. Nothing would happen. And the solution that they came up with is cruel, fucking ghastly, as we see these people bomb children and fucking shoot women off a pier with the rockets, then pile their corpses on carts, count them for score, and then just drop them off into fucking ravines from bombs from wars before. It is horrific, but it's a solution still. Less people die, and maybe there's a point where this will stop all at all, but we see the contempt and the things it breeds in this primitive tribes where they grab fucking shovels and pitchforks and they camp out travelers who go from this country and they just murder them brutally because they need an outlet for the rage that they have.
Yeah, Kino predicted the purge. There's a part where the woman who invented the genocide game system looks at Kino and tells her, when you eventually get pregnant and feel a child growing within you, you will understand why I did this. And that was interesting to me because that is one of the very, very few characters that immediately realizes that Kino is a girl and acts on that when interacting with her. And also, that is one of the very few places where someone hems in Kino's identity and specifically her gender ambiguity in a way that presses against her. And it stood out to me because Kino is very androgynous, we said, is very free of all boundaries or labels you could put on her. And Genocide Lady is one of the few people who puts a constriction on Kino that it would be hard for Kino to shrug off. Because if you assume that Kino has sexual desires at all and that she is heterosexual, which admittedly are big assumptions, but if you assume that, if Kino does get older, has sex, and eventually gets pregnant, that would be one of the few things that actually disrupts her identity as an ethereal, sexless, genderless, sprite-like creature who travels through the world with no consequences.
Here's the thing, for all of the character that I do give Kino, I think that she is kind of meant to be blank, because the author wants you to put yourself in the place of Kino, and to make it more readily available, she doesn't have a lot of evident characteristics.
No.
Does that make any sense?
That is true. I will say Kino is a easy character to project yourself onto, although they do have strong characterization in ways. It's just very subtly done. But I found that interesting because that is obviously what the author is doing in general with Kino, but that character hit Kino with the one thing that would potentially shatter that. And Kino doesn't have a good response at the time. That Kino has a uterus, and that if she got pregnant, that would rapidly change things.
Goddamn women and their babies changing things.
We know... Well, yeah. We don't know that much about Master.
Yeah.
I'm serious, because that's the one aspect of Kino's life that is not really accounted for by the way they live, is sexuality and what would happen if Kino becomes a more sexual person as she gets older.
Man.
Where Kino Sr. can fuck people randomly, I assume he does as a traveler, but assuming Kino Jr. is straight, that's a more complicated aspect of their life, and presumably one Master had to figure out as well, and they don't really get into that either.
There's not a lot of sexuality, if any at all, in this animated series, so that just never crossed my mind, I gotta admit. And I even saw Dojins with the character. I was like, I don't know if that even feeds the series.
Dojins with Kino is a tough sell, I'd say. I just found it interesting where Kino has a very strange relationship to identity, where Kino seems to find it hilarious that other people constantly fuck up her gender, or alternatively, she doesn't even care about gender at all, and will laugh at people when
No, I don't agree with that, because she explicitly corrects people when they call her a boy. She's like, refer to me as Kino.
That's the thing.
But I don't think she explicitly wants to tell them because it's a disadvantage.
And that's the thing.
I think she hides it for strategic purposes. You know? It's something her master told her.
That does make sense, and there are many reasons Kino would do it. But what you just said is something about Kino that is so funny to me, where whenever someone tries to put an identifier on Kino, she'll respond by saying, I'm just Kino. And Kino itself is a fake name. She stole that from a person she knew for 2 days who died in front of her.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And that's why I found that so interesting, is Kino treats identity as something which is either irrelevant or completely utilitarian, and she floats through life in this very free-spirited, undefined way. And I like that evil Genocide Lady hits her with the one thing that, at least to the audience, if Kino has an answer for that, she has not explained it. And even if that's not anything immediate, I can see somewhere in the future, Kino would have to make a decision about that.
In this particular series, there are a lot of moments of silence where two characters kind of understand each other just by looking at each other after certain thing is said, and it's something that happens in this moment as well, where as we started calling her at this point, the Genocide Lady and the main protagonist, Kino, they kind of look at each other after the phrase, and they just get it. they just get each other at the moment. They don't necessarily have to agree with each other, but they get each other. It's a good moment. Any moments like that you found for yourself, Green?
Well, the show's full of good moments. It's just hard to know. Yes, there is a lot of silence in this show, and like you said, a lot of it is almost a pregnant silence where you feel like emotions are humming along in the background. They're just not being acknowledged.
Well, I have a suggestion then. How about we talk about something we both found hilarious? It's the episode about the books.
Oh, the books.
Oh, that moment with critics. Oh boy, did it sting.
Yes, one of the weirdest and probably the most memorable and artistic episodes of the series involves a society ran on censorship, where everything is based around a library in the center of the country, which is again a little city-state, where everyone in this city loves books, but very few are available to the public because there is a secret cabal of critics that determine which books are dangerous and which are not. And this city has a problem with a disease where people read books, get really into the ideas, they fall in love with the characters, which was hilarious, and they eventually go crazy and can't separate fantasy from reality, and they go into a rehabilitation facility. And as
That's hella meta. That's
yes,
hella meta.
this was very obviously a commentary on everything. These started as light novels, which is the only reason I did not 100% see that as a waifu thing, falling in love with characters. And as it goes along, it explores these themes of people using fantasy to cope with reality. There is an author character who's a criminal who very flatly states that everyone lives in a constructed fantasy where they're the main character, and the only solution is to write your own story and be the author who stands outside of it, which I thought was cool. But the big twist at the end is the characters who become obsessed with books and go into the rehabilitation facility. The rehabilitation facility is the citadel where they keep the critics. The people who go crazy from the dangerous books end up being the people who run the society and read the dangerous books to decide which are okay for the public. So it becomes this crazy cycle thing.
And moreover than that, they explicitly state that they keep the critics locked away from the society, not the other way around, because critics, they suck out the joy from books for everybody they come in contact with.
Yes.
Oh my god.
It becomes a very meta criticism of criticism, where this story essentially says critics are the worst people in the world. They completely miss the point. Everyone hates them. And the only useful thing they can do is filter out, I guess, really low quality books from general circulation. But yeah, this was a attack on me personally, and I agreed with everything it said.
I just remember, like, the first time I watched this episode, trying to make heads and tails of it, I was so lost, because this episode is structured very chaotically with very artsy transitions in between where you don't quite know what is happening or what is real and not. And if this author character then just comes out of a fucking fountain, talks to Kino as if she was you projecting yourself into the character of Kino as a viewer, and then disappears into nowhere. It's me trying to watch this the first time around, my mind bent itself into a pretzel, trying to find the continuity. And I missed a lot of this commentary. But on rewatch, boy was it funny, especially with Green there, who burst out laughing at the critics.
And the author guy, everything he said, even though he was a crazy mystical hobo man, he was right. Everything he said was true. That people instinctively see themselves as the main character and they have all these strange beliefs that they don't share with each other, but that they use to hide from reality. That is 100% how people are. The writer of Kino's Journey has a PhD in human beings, and they used it to write an episode where critics are thrown in prison, as they should be, and forced to read shitty books. Where critics both run the society and are the worst people in it.
Oh my god, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It was.
Any other episodes you found brilliant?
Well, this is, I'll actually say, that makes me think about the author, where I did a little bit of research into him, not that much. I find him to be a really odd guy. His name is Keiichi Shigesawa. I looked up where that came from. It's a pen name. Keiichi is the main character from Oh My Goddess, the old school goofy ecchi rom-com. And Shigesawa is a corruption of Sig Sauer, which is a North American Germanic Swiss firearms conglomerate. And in an interview, this guy talked about his life. He's a gun maniac. He has an obsessive knowledge of guns. He loves motorcycles. He loves traveling, but wishes he could do it more. And when he talked about his influences, he loves Miyazaki. He loves Galaxy Express 999, which is a very ethereal, conceptual sci-fi show from what I can tell. And then when it got really weird is in his works that he's worked on, he was a contributor for the writing circle that wrote Bludgeoning Angle Dokuro-chan, which is another retarded rom-com, much like Oh My Goddess. And he also wrote part of Sword Art Online. He wrote Gun Gale Online.
He likes guns for sure. Man, even in anime, like even in this anime, that by author's own admission, by director's own admission, and by everybody who's aware of both source material and the show, it's departed quite a bit, but there are a bunch of scenes where Kino just disassembles her gun and like trains with it. And just a lot of gun porn, even in the show, that's departed quite a bit from source material.
And when I learned this about him, Kino's relationship with guns made a lot more sense to me, where Kino is extremely, again, passionate about guns, but she is not flamboyant about guns or frivolous about guns. You never see Kino...
Yeah, very practical.
Yeah, Kino really cares about guns, and she's really into them, but she treats them like a tool. She doesn't pull out guns when she doesn't need to. She doesn't do goofy tricks with them. Well, she does a little, but not that much. And that really stuck with me, where a normal writer, when they think of a gun, they think of, oh, it's this tough, dangerous thing that people will pull out, and it changes everything. But someone who really, really, really knows guns gets to a point where they think of it as a tool, something that you're completely responsible with, something that you have a level head when you use. So Kino pulling out a gun is never this big dick, fuck you moment. It's just a very matter of fact, pop, I solved the problem, we're done.
She doesn't even shoot the gun usually when she pulls it out. She explicitly, like, doesn't kill a lot of people in the show, despite the fact that she can.
Kino kills a shockingly small number of people, to the point where it's strange. Because,
what do you mean, strange?
Kino will be in a situation where it's completely rational to start shooting, and she'll take it on faith that the other person will have a conversation. Like after the genocide village, she gets confronted by those people you mentioned who are from the genocided tribe where they want to take revenge on Kino for no reason. Kino sees a pile of belongings, realizes that people are being murdered on this road, and she stops, gets out, and calls out to them to start a conversation. It is amazing that she didn't just start shooting.
Well, yeah.
She knows they're there to kill her.
But it's not in her policy to shoot first, then ask questions. It's quite the opposite, so it definitely wasn't out of character for her, but I think the main thing to get out of that interaction was that contempt breeds more contempt, and same with abuse, that everything is cyclical in this world, and people being abused will stick someone underneath them to abuse in turn, and that it's kind of a moral of the episode. It's difficult to explain like this on the spot. Anyway, there have been a couple of episodes in this show where there were quite some morals that we found entertaining at the very least, like 3 Beds Along the Rails. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I will say that is probably the episode that is going to stick with me the most.
Why is that?
Because it's an absurd scenario and it's just a very memorable set piece. But after you finish it, you go, yeah, that's how the world works. This is how life actually works. I have had jobs where I basically knew the job made no sense and it only existed so that the person above me could game the system. Or else it was the product of people not paying attention and someone else sweeps in, picks up money off the floor that no one's watching, and I'm simply part of the mechanism for doing that. And watching these 3 guys toil away at what might be real, but is probably fake work, was relatable. I fucking felt that.
It's also structured in a very interesting way, where when the episode starts, we're following Kino. She's traveling across this rail track, which is all rusty and fucked up and just old and abandoned. And they come across a guy who's polishing it. He asks her to move around him. They have a dinner. She tells him a story about people in a country where no need for work exists, but they still work specifically so they can have stress, so they have some way to evaluate each other's place in society. Because they have no reason, like, scarcity has been solved for that country. And it's basically a story about doing a pointless job for the sake of doing a job. And she tells it to this dude as she's polishing the rail tracks. He's been doing it for like 50 years now. He doesn't get any paychecks. They're all going to his family. And nobody just told him to stop, so he's been going on until it's done. So then, as the episode moves along and Kino is about to depart, he asks her, "Where do you think you're going, though?" It cuts, and she comes across the second guy as she's traveling across these now polished tracks, who is disassembling them, pulling them out, and he's like, "Oh shit, move around, let's have a dinner. Can you tell me a story?" And she does tell him the same story, cuts there quick. And as she's about to depart, when they have had this conversation, he asks her, "So, where are you going, traveler?" And it freezes on that moment as we move into the next scene, where now it's a guy assembling the track back together. And Kino and Hermes can't believe the shit they're seeing. This time around, he asks her to move around his car. She does. He sits down to have a dinner, and he asks her, Kino, "Do you think we can have a chat? Do you have a story to tell?" And she's like, "Nah, I'm not a very good storyteller." And moves on as he asks her the question of, "Where do you think you're going?" And every time that question was asked, I always had it in my mind where I wasn't quite sure if they're asking Kino and the viewer if they know where their life is going and if they have direction and a point to their journey, or if they're being very literal and they're aware that they have been doing this god-useless job for 50 years, and it becomes more and more evident that they're just doing this job completely pointlessly because the company was sending them one after each other with maybe a week of difference in between each other, maybe a day, if you fucking uh, judge by Kino's time of travel in between the two dudes or the three dudes.
Well,
So yeah, and the other meaning that I got out of this interaction at the end is that maybe they're being literal, that there is probably no town where she's going. And right after this story with the three guys ends, there's a story right there about a town which is completely destroyed, a town ruled by the majority vote. So it's structured quite well. Like, it affirms both points without being concrete on anything and leaving you some room to debate it for yourself. Did you have this issue, Green?
well, at the end, when the last person asks, "Where are you going?" they do an ominous ping sound, and they zoom in on Kino's face, so I'm willing to take that as an indication that something is going on there. But I see that episode as playing into a theme that goes through the whole work of Kino, which is the idea of pointless work and the question of, is what you're doing valuable, and does the end result matter in whether or not it's valuable? Because the implication there is that Kino is arguably doing the same thing in her own way, where several people take her to task about, you're a traveler, you don't really do anything necessarily when you go to a new place. Sometimes you do, but it's almost a coincidence. You have no code of ethics or anything. You go from place to place, you look around, you meet a few people, then you do it again somewhere else, and you're probably going to do this forever. And the audience likes Kino and wants her to keep traveling, and I think that's a moment where you're supposed to be questioning, why do I like it when Kino does something repetitive with an unclear end result, but I look at these guys and think they're silly? And the question there is, am I supposed to change my mind and think that these guys actually have a pretty good thing going when you think about it? Or am I supposed to look at Kino and ask myself, what makes her better?
That is a very interesting way to put it. That's definitely not the way I thought about it before, but that's something I should probably consider. Man, it's a good show. It's a good show. But realistically, the reason I wanted to watch it with you is because I came across somewhere, I don't remember where, I came across a Greek mythos which reminded me of a part in the third episode, Land of Prophecies. And that just brought the show straight back to my mind. So, in this third episode in general, what is happening is there's a book of prophecies. As Kino comes across the first countries, it is prophesied in this book, or people interpreted from it, that they're going to die in 3 days. And Kino's stay coincides with the end of the world, which is probably the funniest interaction in the beginning. Where Kino is basically checking into a hotel, and the clerk at the reception asks her, "Your stay coincides with the end of the world. Is that okay with you?" So yeah, Kino does a bunch of shopping for free because the end of the world is coming, and obviously it doesn't. And the new guy comes up and says that he has an interpretation of the book and that the end of the world is coming, but now that the old theory has been proven wrong, his interpretation must be correct, and it's gonna be in 30 years or whatever. So then we start following the history of this book and of prophecies, and we find out that it's actually just a mad poem from a dude in a different country that has been recorded and then just spread as a thing by another traveler before. And this is the particular story, because I'm very bad with names and even worse with Greek mythos, so maybe you can remember this one. It's about a man who was had a harp, and his wife was stolen from him by Hades. So he travels into the hell, to the bottom of the abyss, and has to after having talked to Hades himself, basically strikes a deal with him and his wife, that if he leaves the hell without looking back, his wife will be following him, and if he travels back to the surface without looking back to see if she's there, it's fine. And if he looks back, then she stays in hell with Hades. You remember that?
That's Orpheus and Eurydice. I see the connection, but more on like a vibe level than a plot level.
Yeah, because from what I recall, he used to be like this man who spread a lot of cheer through his songs and ballads, and once he fucked up with his wife really badly, like the only ballads he ever made from that point onward were sad. And in this particular part of the episode, we'll learn about a author whose joy was just escaping from him as breath with every word he said, and he sang poems to it, and everybody was happy. And then King orders him to make a sad poem. He can't do it because he's just that happy with his family and wife. So on the last day, his wife, having no ability to cope with his imminent death, kills herself in front of him, and as she dies, words of any joy and happiness are ever burned away from this man, and he just starts spewing sad poem that never ends from henceforth. That's sort of the connection that I made there. So yeah, he basically creates this endless poem that for 10 years he recites without end, and then as he dies, his daughter picks up where he finished and just recites the entire poem over and over, and it becomes the tradition of the country, where the only respite they get from sadness of the poem is once every 10 years, once they have to choose a new girl with the best voice in the country to pick it up, and at night. It's a depressing place. I would love it there. So how are you doing, Green? Did you get anything from this episode in general? Because there was a lot of discussion with other people that I watched the show with around this particular episode.
I'll say that was a good episode. I don't know if I have anything relating it to the show as a whole.
Which ones? Actually, the better way to put it is, were there any other episodes that like really struck a nerve with you?
I will say, yeah, the Wise Man episode and the Colosseum episode are probably the big ones that I find interesting that we haven't talked about.
Really? The Colosseum? Why is that?
I find the Colosseum episode interesting for two reasons. One is the Keen. I thought the Keen was an interesting character in that he seemed completely self-aware about the fact that he was an asshole, where in this episode with the Colosseum, where it's exactly what it sounds like, there's a class structure based around gladiator fights, everyone goes in, and whoever wins the gladiator fight, every time they have one, they get to add a new rule to the Constitution, and of course Kino ends up being a participant. The King of Gladiator Town is very sadistic, very mean. He openly murdered his father and cast out his children, one of whom comes back and tries to take him down. And I found him interesting as a character in that he was malicious and knew it and didn't really try to apologize for himself. He more or less openly says at places that he expects other people to intervene or take him down, or he wants people to try to fix him.
That he needs help.
Yeah, at one point he propositions multiple female characters for marriage in a way where you're not sure how serious it is, one of whom is Kino. And the idea of randomly marrying a 15-year-old girl with the assumption that she will fix you as a human being is just a fascinating train of thought. and I find that interesting because the Colosseum episode is also really the only place where Kino intervenes in human affairs in a big way, where it ends with her shooting the king, killing him, and using her win in the Colosseum to add to the Constitution a rule that the elites have to fight each other to determine the new king, and then she leaves. And I'm wondering if the king's characterization as hating himself and not liking that he's such a bad guy, and the fact that Kino chooses now to intervene and suddenly become a political actor, I wonder if those are linked. And that's the big question in my head that makes me find this episode interesting.
The way I explain it to myself is basically I think she decided to intervene like this when he asked for help. Because Kino, when she's asked for help, she usually provides it. I just don't know if that's if they quite understood each other there, I suppose, because he asks for help, but I don't know if Kino decided that he asked for help to end his reign, or to end him, or to what? Or if she just decided that this is the best way to help him. But I think that the big thing why she kills him and stays in the tournament until the very end is because she wants to explicitly help him. Does that make any sense?
Maybe. Do you think she was trying to help him by blowing him up?
Well, yes, in a way I do. Because he admits to being like a shitty person that cannot change on his own, and the likelihood of him finding somebody who can change him for the better is negligible, if not zero. So him being dead is probably the best way to fix the country.
I don't deny that. It's just odd, and it plays into Kino's inhuman, above-it-all logic.
Oh, I just don't know if that fucking thing at the end which ensures bloodbath was necessary, because here's the thing, if you become a first-rate citizen in this particular country, you have to have probably won this Colosseum fight at some point, meaning that a solid chunk of the people in the upper strata of the country are just fucking killing machines.
In a way, that makes it more legitimate. If the Hunger Games, the people in the capital, were actually veterans of the Hunger Games, that would have made that system seem a lot more fair.
Probably what I have to say about this episode the most is that it's been mostly the most changed out of all from the original material. It is also the one that they reboot in the reboot of Kino no Tabi in 2017, I believe it was released. And it only takes one episode there instead of two here.
It was odd that they lingered for a whole 2 episodes on this, because I think it's the only place they do that.
They had a lot of scenes that aren't in the original, but I think it flows much better that way.
It was probably a situation where it was just a bit too long for 1 episode, so they had to pad it out to 2.
And I think they did it well. It's one of the advantages the show has. It, like a lot of series in general, like practice, like in recent memory, they take source material and then use it in a way to make a better anime. But in this show, they, instead of subtracting from the original material, they add on it and then place it in different. They fucking, what's the word? They change the chronological order of the show for it to be better glued together as a story, even manipulating different individual self-contained stories. And that way, just overall narrative, despite being split into different small miniature parts, still presents as a better whole. What I'm saying is, it uses the original material, changes it in a way which makes it better by adding instead of subtracting from it. Does that make any sense? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, that's completely true. And you were asking what episodes I like. I think the only other one we haven't talked about, which you like as well, is the Wise Old Man episode.
I just like you saying wise old man.
Because I am one.
You're the wizard.
Yes, I'm the wizard. I somehow settled in. Oh, yeah. Well, Michi called me a Lord of the Rings dwarf man, so I guess wizard is an upgrade.
Not exclusive.
No. As you predicted going in, I felt for the wise old man character, and he plays into a lot of the themes of Kino in general, I think, of does this matter? And in the end, he didn't really seem to believe it did.
Well, the thing with this particular character is that he was brainwashed to have no desires. And in the end, when those desires come back to him in almost an accidental fashion, and all the feelings, he just questions what was his life for when he chased nothing, wanted for nothing, and did nothing.
Yeah, where they have this character who, through Clockwork Orange shenanigans, spent his entire life being mistaken by other people as a sage because he didn't want anything, when in reality he was simply sort of lobotomized. And when it all comes back, he falls into despair. I find that so interesting because, again, it's hard to put into words why that's different than Kino. The only real thing is Kino does stuff, while the wise old man guy spent 50 years sitting on the side of the road, staring into the middle distance in front of him.
Well, Kino put it the best herself, where she says, the difference between us is that I do what I do willingly, of my own accord. I wouldn't have it any other way. So, yes, they both went basically on a journey, where they weren't exactly the same kind of journey, but she does what she does because she wants to, and he did it because he had no desire to, just did it for the fact of doing it.
And when she's on the raft leaving, Kino specifically mentions she uses the word consciousness, and I found that really... Yes. And I found that interesting because Kino does not seem to have an ego very much. And she specifically criticizes other people at various points in the story for having an ego. And I think that's very central to who Kino is, where Kino will protect her life, but she doesn't seem to be afraid of dying at all. And Kino will attempt to do stuff, but she doesn't seem to care that much whether or not it goes anywhere or succeeds. There's even a point in this where Kino has a almost Kiki's Delivery Service-esque mini-arc where she meets someone making a flying machine, and she spends all this time helping this inventor set up her little airplane, and once it finally takes off, the lady says to Kino, "Oh my god, that's incredible, can you believe it?" And Kino basically says, "No, I completely thought this was going to crash." And that really...
by the way, the most Pokemon-inspired character out of all, by far, Jesus.
Yes, this woman had a very Nurse Joy-esque face and very poofy hair. Very Pokemon-y.
She literally looks like a Pokemon character.
The woman, the inventor woman. Oh.
Yes.
And that really told me something about Kino, where Kino will do something that she actively thinks is pointless while she's doing it, but internally her logic is, I'm Kino. I help people have adventures as I travel around. And this woman could crash her plane and die right in front of her, which from Kino's perspective is the most likely outcome. But the fact that she believes in herself is good enough for Kino, and Kino almost seems to think that her opinion is irrelevant. She's just here to be a part of the moment. I see Kino as being in this place mentally where she just acts. she does her thing that she feels is what she's supposed to do, and nothing else matters. She doesn't even seem to have a concept of herself as a character in her own story. She just reacts to what's around her and does what feels right. And I see that as really admirable if you can bat away the questions like she does of, does this matter?
Well, I think she helps people do what they believe in, so long as it doesn't explicitly go against her rule that she wants to stay alive in the end.
Oh, yeah, that's probably a part of it. Kino probably would not have gotten in the plane herself.
Yeah. No, she wouldn't have. I don't see her do that.
And it's weird that Kino is so diligent about not dying, because Kino doesn't seem to care that much if she did die. You never see Kino afraid of anything.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. For example, what we recall one of the later episodes where the tribe of Tetatones or whatever their name was about to kill her and they attack her.
That's what
She explicitly looks very unnerved.
I don't think she looks
Stoic?
unnerved at all.
She's like sweating beads there.
And I'm willing to see that as more arousal or being in a
Jesus.
Or fuck, you know what I mean. I'm willing to or
Yes, I do.
or rather fight or flight or adrenaline. I see that as more an adrenaline thing. But you never see Kino have angst, or you never see her contemplate fear or death or anything like that. The amount of calm and deliberate she is in that situation compared to basically any other human, Kino doesn't have like a cosmic fear of death. She'll be startled by a danger in front of her, but the idea of death doesn't seem to mean anything to her.
Well, I don't think you remember this part. It was in the second episode, A Tale of Feeding of Fathers, where in the end, the people whom she helped were the wolves, as they called them, and they were the slave traders. And they have her at gunpoint, and they demand that she undress to a certain degree and start taking away all her weapons. In the end, once she gets out of the situation with a certain degree of luck and a lot of skill, she has a moment where she just hugs herself and says, "God, this was fucking close."
Oh, okay. I'll give you that one. And no, I didn't remember that.
In the extreme situations, she stays calm, but I don't think she has conquered fear, because I don't think you just can. It's just that every time she has an opportunity, especially like we see at the end of the day where she stays in the hotel, she trains with her gun. Like, she pulls it out, looks at it for a second, sheathes it, pulls it out again. Like, there's a certain routine that she follows that we may not be present to in the show, that we don't see as a viewer. But she has got under a rigorous regiment of training to not conquer her fear, but ride it out, I suppose, would be the best way to put it. And to use it to her advantage, but she still wants to stay alive. She fights for it. She just fights through the fear to stay calm in the extreme situations.
Maybe a better way of putting it is a lot of the stuff that most humans angst over on a minute-by-minute basis, I think Kino has pushed it down into a more unconscious place. Where Kino doing her gun drills, I don't think she's doing that going, gotta stay alive, gotta stay alive, gotta stay alive. I don't think she's chanting that as she does it. I think it's just an instinct at this point. Doing the gun drills and prepping her weapons, it's what she does. And I think
It's become a routine for her, yeah.
And most of the time when she's fighting, I don't think there's this internal panic of, oh God, I'm going to die, I need to do this. I think she has that warrior instinct where she pushes all that stuff aside, and in the moment, like I said, she just acts.
I don't think we're disagreeing here. I think we're basically speaking about the same thing.
Okay. I just find that...
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I just find that interesting because... And Kino Sr. was kind of like that in a way too. When original Kino, middle-aged man Kino, who younger Kino took the name from, when he protects her, it was not this big high-minded moment of I'm a good guy that protects young girls. He just saw Kino in danger and reflexively jumped in front of her.
And got stabbed and died horribly.
Yes.
That's another thing about the show. Like, it's this calm, slow burn? Like, how do I put it best? Is this calm show that goes at its own pace, very deliberate, very thought-provoking, and then it just becomes cruel. Like, it just becomes brutal with its themes, and sometimes to the point with its visuals, which are quite limited. I'll admit that. They're quite limited.
I think that's part of the point, though, and I think that's part of the point of Kino, where Kino is a very natural, animalistic person in an odd way, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's like the Attack on Titan thing. The world is a cruel place, it's also a beautiful place. And I think that's where both Kino Sr. and eventually Kino Jr. get, where there is violence and crazy shit all the time, but it's not all that bad if you don't fixate on it. Where the idea of people getting constantly hurt is much, much worse than the reality of people getting constantly hurt if you're willing to accept it. And I think that's how those people operate.
Yeah, I think the ultimate message of the show is that there's a lot of crazy shit in the world, but it's still a beautiful place. And so long as you have something that you enjoy doing, and you keep doing that, you'll find your place in the world, and you'll be content, at the very least.
And maybe your place in the world is not having a place in the world and driving around eternally on a motorcycle for 3 days at a time. But that also counts.